Now let's see if we can find another story. I thought there was another one around in here somewhere. And this is one that is called The Sleeping Beauty. Once upon a time, a beautiful little girl was born to a king and queen. 7 fairies were invited to her christening, but unfortunately the king forgot to ask one old and wicked fairy. She came to the christening, but how angry she was that she had been forgotten. One by one, 6 of the fairies gave the little princess the loveliest gifts in the world. But before the 7th could step forward, the wicked fairy hobbled up to the cradle. When the princess is 15 years old, she shall prick her finger with a spindle and die, she said with a horrible laugh. Alas! Alas! Cried everyone, and the queen to weep. But the king shouted, Catch that old woman! We must make her undo her spell. But the wicked fairy had disappeared, and search as they might, she could not be found. The 7th fairy came up to the cradle, and touching the little baby gently, she said, I cannot undo all the harm the wicked fairy has done, but my magic is strong enough to help a little. When the princess picks her finger, she shall not die, but sleep for 100 years. At the end of that time, a prince shall awaken her. 15 years is a long time, and everyone hoped that something would happen before then to save the princess. So the king made a royal command that every spindle in the kingdom should be destroyed. If there are no spindles, my daughter cannot prick herself on one, he said, and felt quite at ease. The little princess grew up as good as she was beautiful. She knew nothing of the spell, for no one was allowed to tell her. Anyway, most people had forgotten all about it. It was so long ago. On her 15th birthday, the princess had a party, and she and her friends played hide and seek. Away ran the princess through the castle to find a good place to hide. In so doing, she came to a tower she had never visited before. She climbed the stairs gaily, and there in a tiny room at the top she found an old woman twisting her thread around the spindle. She had lived in this far-off room for so long that she had never heard of the king's command. At once, the princess felt that she must hold the spindle in her hand, and she begged the old woman to give it to her. Very well, child, said the old woman, and gave it into her hand, for she knew no better. The princess took it, pricked her finger, and immediately fell to the ground in a deep sleep. The old woman, much alarmed, fetched help, but no one could do anything. The king and queen, the doctors, the wise women, all were helpless, for the princess was enchanted. She heard and saw nothing. Sadly, the king carried her to her room and placed her on a beautiful bed of gold and silver, with hangings of rose-colored silk and satin. Her cheeks were as pink as ever, her lips as red, her hair as golden. And then the king and the queen kissed their lovely daughter, and with tears in their eyes, they went away. By this time, the good seventh fairy had heard what had happened. She arrived in a chariot drawn by snow-white swans. Without wasting any time, she waved her wand, and immediately everyone fell into a deep a sleep as the princess. The king and queen on their throne, the servants at their tasks, the horses in the stables, the cats and dogs, and the princess's pet doves all fell instantly asleep. Even the fire's flames were stilled. Then the fairy waved her wand for the last time, and with a few minutes the palace and its grounds were hidden from sight by bushes and trees. So thick were they that no man might force a way through. Before long, no one remembered the princess at all, except as a story, and she slept in peace. Years went by, 50 years, 100 years, and a prince came to those parts hunting the wild deer. Galloping ahead of his servants, he found himself in a wood, and suddenly caught sight of the towers and battlements of a castle above the topmost branches. This is strange, thought the prince. I did not think anyone lived near this wood. And calling an old woodcutter who was working nearby, he asked him if he knew whose the castle was. I have never seen it before, answered the old man, looking at it in surprise. My father used to tell me that there was a castle hereabouts. He did say, too, that a beautiful princess is asleep there waiting for a prince to rescue her. Who knows? The prince said. I may be the lucky prince who wakens her. He tied up his horse, and with his sword in his hand, he began to make his way through the trees toward the castle. He could now see it quite plainly, for the forest seemed to open out in front of him as he walked. There was only a narrow path, and brambles and bushes were tangled on either side of it, but the prince went on eagerly. How still it was! Not a bird sang, not a leaf rustled, and no animals watched him pass by. His own footsteps seemed the only sound in the world. So he came out of the forest, and there before him stood a fine castle. No one came out to welcome or challenge him as he entered the courtyard, but he saw that there were many people there. All of them slept. Dogs lay asleep, the horses stood motionless in their stables, and even the spiders were still in their webs. In the kitchen the servant stood without moving, and the cook was holding a spoon in midair over a bowl of batter. There was not a sound anywhere. Through the silent rooms walked the prince on tiptoe, for he feared to disturb the sleepers. He climbed a wide marble stairway and went into a room with wide open windows. The sunshine streamed onto a bed, and there lay the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She seemed to be about 15 or 16 years old. Her cheeks were pink, her lips red, and her golden hair was spread round her. Leaning over the princess, the prince saw that she was breathing quietly. She was so young and beautiful that he could not help kissing her. At once she awoke, and sitting up she cried joyfully, "Oh, what a lovely dream I have had!" The spell was broken. As soon as the princess woke, so did everyone else. The servants went on with their work. The dogs ran round barking. The horses neighed in the stables. The birds sang, and the garden blossomed into beautiful flowers of every scent and color. In came the king and queen to welcome the prince, and there he stood with the princess on his arm. Before long, they were married and lived happily ever after. As well they might. And that's the end of the Sleeping Beauty.